things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters and the International Mandela Effect Conference, and you're now listening to DarkWolf's Den Show on Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
Hello. Hello.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light, and you're now listening to DarkWolf's Den.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch
of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness, this is the Darkwolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to another episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Thursday, November 12th, 2020, and tonight we're talking about the alien abduction phenomenon. Have you ever been abducted by aliens? Do you know somebody who claims they have? They might not be as crazy as they sound. Then in the second half, we're going to look into the evidence that may or may not exist around these case files and see what we can come up with. That is tonight, November 12th, 2020 on the Darkwolf's Den Show. But first, today in history. On this day in 1799, Andrew Ellicott makes the first known record of a meteor shower observation in the U.S., and this was from a ship off the coast of the Florida Keys. That's right, first known observation of a meteor shower in all of the USA, 1799, ladies and gentlemen, and that is today's Today in History. That's right, and tonight we're talking about alien abduction. That's right, see, this is a phenomenon that I didn't take to immediately. I had been a ufologist researcher for about 3 or 4 years when I ran across the alien abduction phenomenon, and I'm gonna be honest, I am the first one to call shenanigans on this, or at least I was. When I first ran across these case files, I said, no way, It's one thing to see an alien craft, maybe even one landing, at worst, or like the Roswell incident, but you don't really see craft coming down and grabbing someone and taking off all the time. And I called shenanigans. I said that's just a little bit too much for me. But the more I got to looking into these case files, the more I realized the same oddity that I realized across most of the paranormal case files is that these people who have never met each other a day in their life clearly are not colluding together, are coming up with the exact same story and exact same details, and you can't ignore when these people from all over the world say the exact same thing. You have to kind of pop your ears open and listen just a little less incredulously, because I was very incredulous when I first found the abduction phenomenon. And I don't blame anybody for being such, even today, because even today some of these case files are more than disturbing and really hard to swallow sometimes. But let's dive into this topic. What do you guys say?
UFOs and alien encounters have been reported since antiquity. Yet in the 1950s, an explosion of UFO sightings rocked the planet and continue to this day.
Most of the modern day, all of the modern day cases didn't start happening until after the 1947 Roswell incident, which again I find kind of intriguing.
Although they are often harmless events, there is a darker side to the UFO phenomenon, the alleged abduction or visitation of human beings by alien visitors.
What mainly makes this a dark phenomenon is the human rarely ever has any kind of control over the situation. Most of the time it's something that's happening against the human's free will.
Many abduction stories tell of aliens performing medical tests on their human test subjects, but some claim that the aliens are also interested in our mating habits, or perhaps require our help in creating a race of human-alien hybrids. Whatever the reasoning, some alien abductees report sexual encounters during their abduction event, and few are more well-known than the first recorded abduction of the modern age.
There are many theories as to why this is going on, and maybe we'll touch on them as we go along this evening, but Let's figure out what the phenomenon is altogether before we start theorizing about what could be causing it. So here is the earliest modern day recorded case file of a UFO abduction that we have on record. Now, this said, this isn't the earliest one in America. This is the earliest one on case file altogether in the modern age.
The abduction of Antonio Villas Boas. In early October 1957, Boas began seeing strange, bright lights in the sky around his family's farm in rural Brazil. On October 5th, just before midnight,
and Brazil is actually a well-known hotspot. And that's how some of these usually start, is just start seeing a UFO here and there, and a lot of times that's all you can remember, and there's a reason for that we'll also get into here shortly, but it's usually how it starts as a couple of viewings of something, and a lot of times it's a family genetic line-based thing. If you go looking in your family line or talking to your family that will actually talk about things like this, you'll usually find that in the history of your family, down the bloodline, there's been other abductees besides yourself, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. Let's get into this first case file before I ruin the whole show.
Boas spotted a bright white light in the sky as he opened his bedroom window to get some fresh air. Later that night, after sleeping for a bit, Boas awoke and discovered the same light in the exact same position. Yet, as he looked at it, the light suddenly began to move toward him at a frightening speed.
It sounds like whatever it was monitoring this gentleman. And the reason I say that is that it did not react until such time that he woke up. Then it started coming towards him.
Terrified, he slammed shut the window shutters and woke up his brother, and the two watched as the bright light shined through the closed shutters before leaving.
Okay, so that sounds pretty simple. That sounds like a close encounter of the first kind, just seeing a light off in the distance. Although odd, still.
The light reappeared 9 days later when Boas and his brother were out working in the fields at night to beat the daytime heat. This time, the light hovered about 300 feet above their head and moved from one end of the field to the other as the brothers approached to investigate. Suddenly, the light disappeared, as if having been turned off, though Boas suggested that the light may have simply lifted up and rushed away while he wasn't looking. The next night, working in the fields alone, a reddish light zoomed out of the sky towards Boas at incredible speed. Before he could decide what to do, it had already stopped directly above his head, and Boas could see a craft that looked like a large, elongated egg.
This is another one of those pieces of evidence that you find showing up over and over and over, and that is this egg-shaped craft, or egg-like shaped craft, or cigar-shaped, or, people describe it different ways, but it's pretty well the exact same thing. And you find this a lot across all these different case files, one of those other oddities that lines right up.
As the craft began to descend, at which point a terrified Boas ran to his tractor. But upon reaching it, the tractor and its lights suddenly died.
And that escalates this encounter from a close encounter of the first kind to a close encounter of the second kind, which is a UFO event in which the physical effect is alleged. This can be interference of a vehicle, electronic device interference, anything of that sort. So he just scaled up to a level 2.
While Boas was fleeing for his house, a small figure suddenly grabbed his arm.
Wow, he is jumping through the Heineck scale here. So he started out with a close encounter of the first kind. He's seen a light in the sky. Then he jumped over to the close encounter of the second kind when the tractor or the device stopped working. Then shot his way up into the close encounters of the third kind. This is when UFO encounters in which an animated entity is present. These include humanoids, robots, and humans who seem to be occupants or pilots of said UFO.
According to Boas, the figure was dressed in a full body-length suit of some kind, with an elongated helmet and what appeared to be breathing tubes connected to its bodysuit.
To me, this makes a lot of sense, because I doubt any alien creature could just drop in on any other alien planet, because to them it would be an alien planet, and just be able to breathe just fine, no problem, everything hunky-dory. So that part of the detail of the case file really makes a lot of sense to me.
Shaking off the figure, Boas turned to run again, but was surrounded by 3 figures who overpowered him. Boas was taken to a flexible metallic rolling ladder, which whirred him up and into the spacecraft.
And now we have hit the meat of tonight's topic, the close encounter of the 4th kind. An encounter in which a human is abducted by the UFO or its occupants. This was not originally in Hynek's close encounter scale, as he wasn't as much a believer in the abduction phenomenon at the time. And again, I gotta say, I don't blame him. When I first heard of the abduction phenomenon, I was very incredulous about this information. But again, as you're gonna hear, these case files make a lot of sense.
Once inside, he found himself in a small, brightly lit square room. The aliens grabbed Boas and held him in place while they undressed him, and despite his opposition, the aliens seemed to take care not to harm him or damage his clothing as they patiently removed it.
And I can only guess this is so it can be put back on in the same way that it was taken off, and nothing can be witnessed or seen to be out of place after all said and done, even though that rarely is the case.
All the while, the aliens communicated between themselves, with Boas describing the sounds as some kind of animalistic grunts. The sounds were so foreign to Boas that when interviewed later, he had a difficult time describing or recreating them.
Now, that is one oddity of this case file. In most case files, we find that the aliens are telepathic and the subject is able to speak with them just by thoughts. So the fact they had an audible language here, this is one of the few case files that do have that particular detail, although not the only case file.
Once naked, the aliens applied a clear liquid to his body, likely a disinfectant, and took blood with a device from his chin that left small scars later noticed by doctors.
And these scars in latter years called scoop marks, because most of them look like just that, little scoops out of the skin. These are pretty commonplace amongst the abduction case files and scenarios. And the fact this was documented by a doctor later, I love that, because these are very well documented cases. That is one strange thing about the alien abduction cases, as we'll get into this evening and find out, is that there is a lot of documentation across medical and police and things of that nature. But again, we'll get into all that here shortly.
At this point, Boas said he was left alone for about an hour until suddenly a nude female figure entered the room, described by Boas as human yet with features that, although beautiful, were not quite right. A device in the ceiling emitted a puff of smoke that made Boas nauseous initially, but he thought it acted as some sort of aphrodisiac.
Which would make sense if you had a partner that was not exactly the most common of partners. I'm sure an aphrodisiac definitely would not hurt the situation at this point.
After engaging in intercourse with the alien woman, Boas was allowed to dress and return to his farm.
And this is not the only case file that I've run across where the two ended up partnering together like that. The alien and the human ended up in a partnership of such type. Again, this is not the only case file, but this is definitely the first case file of them all.
But not before trying to secretly steal a small device from the ship as proof of his experience, which caused one of the aliens to react very violently.
In the words of my hero, Dr. Michio Kaku, if you're ever in a scenario where you are abducted and you are lucid enough to find yourself on the ship, steal something, anything. Turns out it is not against the law to steal from an alien race. Steal something, bring back the proof so we can finally, once and for all, put this question to rest. Again, that is from my favorite hero, Dr. Michio Kaku. Brilliant mind. But the point is, always try to get your evidence, right? If you ever find, seriously guys, you ever find yourself in that situation, steal something. I do not advocate stealing except for this particular case.
Boas's story could easily be dismissed as fantasy.
Which, once again, when I first found these case files, that's exactly what I did, was dismiss it as nothing more than fantasy.
If not for the incredible amount of detail and his great reluctance in his telling it. It took Dr. Olavo Tifontes, professor of medicine at the National School of Medicine in Brazil, to convince Boas to go public with his story. After which he did to a journalist and a member of the Brazilian military intelligence. Along with the incredible amount of detail Boas offered about the aliens, their wardrobe, and the craft itself, Boas was also found to be suffering from radiation poisoning.
And once again, this is something that shows up in so many close encounter case files. Whether it's abductions, close encounter of the fourth kind, or even close encounter of the third kind, and someone coming near a ship like the Rendlesham Forest incident, where that was interacted with the ship and not exactly an abduction, but just the same, there was a radiation sickness that the people suffered from. And this radiation sickness I find interesting because, as we know, coming out of space, they're going to be packed with radiation, and that's exactly what we find. So the radiation sickness with no reason, and the fact that that shows up across pretty much all the case files that I've ever found of UFO abduction, really does make a lot more sense as far as the query of where the radiation comes from, of course. But the fact that it shows up across many case files, it really makes you scratch your head if you're honest with yourself and look at it with a common sense viewpoint.
As he exhibited a plethora of other physical ailments for months after his experience.
A plethora. I just like that word. It reminds me of that movie, The Three Amigos, a plethora. Look that scene up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But a plethora of different issues as he returned back in. I could imagine so. Wouldn't you have a plethora or a large amount of issues if you just got abducted and had no real reference point to talk about something like this? But now that we've heard the first case file, right, let's move on. Now that we've got a good idea of certain details, let's move on to the most well-known case file of abduction in all of ufology. Well, one of the two most well-known in all of ufology. This was the first case file to occur of abduction in the United States of America. And there's so many more details behind this. So this, of course, that I'm talking about is the Betty and Barney Hill case. And Betty and Barney Hill, understand, did not need the attention that this brought to them. This was a colored gentleman and a white lady. And at that time, that was not something that was socially accepted as much as it is today. So the last thing they needed was a media circus to come around and mess up their lives. But that's exactly what they ended up with. But let's go ahead and check out the case file of Betty and Barney Hill.
On the drive back home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a trip to Montreal, Quebec, Betty and Barney Hill caught sight of a UFO. The object followed them down the highway for some time before swooping in over top of their car, producing some strange noises, and suddenly disappearing.
This one is a little different from our first case file, mainly in the fact that the abduction happened in the first case file while the person was in bed. And that's not the only time that has come up in case files. It's pretty common that the person is asleep when the abduction occurs, or the abduction scenario begins anyway. They don't always remain asleep, but again, whole nother story. Anyway, the reason that that is really, really interesting is because not all of the abduction case files are when people are asleep. See, most of the time it's attributed to like a sleep paralysis situation, right? Like you're almost a fantasy or half dreaming the situation. And if you're asleep already when the scenario begins, I see how this easily could be dismissed by some as a dream or a sleep paralysis scenario. And everybody knows my feeling on the whole sleep paralysis thing. Yes, I feel it's a true thing. I just feel it's one of those swamp gas things that they use to explain away things that they just can't explain any other way. And the reason is these next two case files that we're going to go over are both including people that are driving at the time of the incident.
But when the Hills reflected on the sequence of events that night, they realized that more had happened than they'd remembered. After undergoing hypnotherapy, the couple recovered memories of being taken aboard an extraterrestrial spaceship and subjected to intrusive medical examinations. This was the first widely publicized UFO case in modern history to involve so-called missing time, and it brought the subject of alien abduction to a world audience.
This is another thing we find that is classic abduction scenario, and that is the missing time. So you see a light in the sky. You're standing there watching it for a couple minutes, and then all of a sudden you look down at your watch and the light is gone and it's been 3.5 hours and you're just standing there. I have a feeling you didn't stand there for 3.5 hours. You have what's called missing time. You can't account for anything that happened in those 3.5 hours, and you just know that you were looking at a light. It seemed like 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, now you're here. This is called missing time, and this is classic in a abduction scenario because it seems that the abductees try to manipulate the memories and place what is called a screen memory in place where one cannot remember what they experienced. A lot of times this is a screen memory of seeing an owl for whatever reason. I think it has to do with the large eyes of the aliens, that the subconscious goes for an owl because it's the closest creature that would make sense logically to us. Again, this is all speculation, but this is speculation that is put forward by most researchers and ufologists, so I'm not just going out on a limb saying any of this. But again, I'm rambling and I've got a little bit off topic, so let's get back to our case file. Again, this is the first case file in history to include, in modern time history, to include missing or lost time. And once again, this is found across a large amount, almost all classic abduction phenomenon scenario case files.
On the night of September 19th, 1961, the Hills were driving southbound on US Route 3 when Betty, riding in the passenger seat, spotted a bright light moving erratically in the sky. The couple watched the light for an extended period of time and twice stopped the car to look at it through binoculars. They could see that it was a physical craft flashing red, amber, and green-colored lights, and it seemed as though it were trying to attract their attention. At one point in the drive, the object came swooping down over top of the Hills' car. Barney slammed on the brakes, grabbed his binoculars, and stepped outside the vehicle.
Stepping outside the vehicle is usually the first step to the abduction scenario. This is where things usually go wrong. And again, this is not the only case file. This is one of a couple tonight we're going to hear with this exact same scenario. The guy just steps up out of the car all of a sudden.
The craft had descended to less than 100 feet above their car, then jumped over to an adjacent field and sat above the treetops. Barney grabbed his handgun and cautiously moved towards the object. He described it as being in the shape of a pancake, with a ring of windows along the outer edge and two small fins sticking out on either side.
Which, in my opinion, matches the elongated egg, quote, end quote, detail of the first case file, doesn't it?
The entire craft was approximately 60 to 80 feet wide. Through his binoculars, Barney was able to see humanoid figures walking around behind blue-lit windows. He claimed that he then received some form of telepathic message instructing him to remain still.
So, two things here. This is also the first encounter of the gray aliens, although some skeptics will tell you it was about 5 years after this incident in a TV show, which is all bunkum. If you look into it, you'll find this was the first recorded encounter of a gray, if you will, or a gray type alien. At least in abduction scenario cases. But what more importantly here, what I want to speak on, is the fact that there's a telepathic communication here. This is one of the first case files where the telepathic communication comes into play. From here out, it remains just that. Perhaps they learned their lesson with Mr. Boas, right?
Convinced that he was about to be captured, Barney ran back to the car and, in a state of panic, warned Betty of the danger and drove away. But the Hills could not escape the craft. It caught up with them on the highway and started keeping pace with their car. The couple heard what they described as a series of rhythmic buzzing tones that seemed to bounce off the trunk of their car. Then, for reasons they could not explain, they ceased all conversation and continued on without incident until they heard a second series of buzzing noises further down the highway. At this point, the couple had trouble remembering what had happened over the previous 20 to 30 minutes. They vaguely recalled encountering a roadblock, making a sudden turn off the highway, and finding a large fiery orb on the road, but they could not explain how all these memories fit together.
And once again, this is a side effect of the screen memories called the memory jumble, and it also shows up in a lot of case files.
To add to their confusion, the couple later realized that the drive had taken 2 to 3 hours longer than anticipated.
Once again, the lost time scenario.
In the following days, the Hills made further inexplicable discoveries. The car trunk had a number of small, shiny circles on it that appeared to have magnetic qualities.
Now remember, this is 1961. I don't think we had craft that were harassing the civilians and flying that low. And I really don't think we had craft that could have magnetized small round dots on someone's trunk. I'm still not entirely sure we have craft that can do that, at least not by human building, but that's a whole nother story. If you go back and listen to my paranormal technology episode, that'll make more sense. But again, this is another weird part of the case file. This is something that is way beyond the technology of 1961.
Barney's shoes had been badly scuffed, and the leather strap on his binoculars had been cut. Betty's dress had also been cut in a number of places, and the hemline was torn on one side. Most unusual was the fact that Barney had found an unnaturally symmetrical ring of warts on his groin.
That piece of the case file, for the record, is very unusual.
Soon, Betty began having dreams of being taken aboard an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Once again, for whatever reason, the technology that they use to put these screen memories in humans, for some reason, doesn't work as well as it should. And the memories tend to come out usually in a dream state because it's locked in the subconscious and the conscious mind is unaware or can't deal with it or whatever the case may be. In this case, was just completely unaware of the conscious things that had happened at the time, but was coming out in a dream state in the subconscious.
And though he had always tried to put the encounter behind him, Barney began suffering extreme anxiety over his ongoing amnesia.
Wouldn't you, though? If you knew you had a bunch of hours of lost time, and you had zero memory whatsoever, and you know something happened, wouldn't you be just a little bit anxious to know what had went on? Wouldn't that drive you just a little bit cuckoo? Not everyone maybe, but I'm sure some of you that would just drive up a wall.
He contacted a local psychiatrist, and with Betty's encouragement, inquired about the possibility of hypnotherapy. His psychiatrist referred him to the office of Dr. Benjamin Simon, a prominent hypnotherapist in Boston. Over the next 6 months, Dr. Simon conducted a series of individual hypnotic and therapeutic sessions with both Betty and Barney. Simon had no interest in UFO stories and did not believe in extraterrestrial visitations.
I love that part right there, because when you get a skeptic like that, who the last thing they want to do is report this is what the findings are, that it was an extraterrestrial visitation or something like that. When the skeptics have no other choice but to admit and be honest what they've got in their case, well, that is interesting. I love seeing things like that in a case file. An unbiased, or as a matter of fact, a skeptically biased person that works with someone like this, a lot of times will be turned into a believer.
He approached the situation with an extremely critical eye and took great pains to prevent details of one partner's recollections from influencing those of the other. After every session, he induced amnesia once again so that the Hills could not discuss their new memories with one another outside the therapy sessions.
And I like this too, as not to accidentally create false memories within each other. So once again, I think this is a great tactic.
Neither of them were allowed to listen to anything that they had said under hypnosis until all the sessions had been completed. In the end, however, the Hills' stories were nearly identical. Their new memories began immediately after the Hills had heard the first set of buzzing noises.
When you have two people who were extensively interviewed, especially in this therapy type setting, and the stories in the case file from each witness independently are exactly the same, then you have to take note, because you know they cannot be making it up at this point. You've got two eyewitness accounts of the exact same incident. Check this out.
Barney recalled feeling suddenly compelled to pull off the highway and drive into the woods. Once he'd driven off the highway, the car stalled, and 6 humanoid figures came to lead the Hills aboard a disc-shaped craft that rested nearby. The Hills were both complacent for reasons that they could not explain. Once aboard, the beings led the Hills into separate rooms and laid them down on empty tables. Both Betty and Barney were subjected to a series of invasive and at times painful procedures that focused on their reproductive systems.
And here is yet another stunning parallel to the first case file that we heard.
Somehow the beings were able to communicate with the Hills, and they offered them reassurance in times of pain. Still, the experience was overwhelmingly negative for both Betty and Barney.
And as it is with most UFO abductees, though not all, most reported as not being the most positive of experiences.
Dr. Simon often had trouble keeping them calm as they recalled the more traumatic moments of their abduction. By the end of the sessions, both Betty and Barney had come to believe that they had, in fact, been abducted by alien beings.
I wouldn't say believed, more so got verification that they weren't crazy.
Betty was able to recreate a star map under hypnosis that she claimed she had been shown while aboard the craft. Later researchers have used this map to argue that the abductors were extraterrestrial beings from the Zeta Reticuli star system.
Well, that last sentence being pure speculation, just the same, the fact that she drew this star map right. What is intriguing about this star map is it took another 20 or 30 years, maybe even 40 years, I can't remember how long, but quite a while before science suddenly verified the star map that Betty had drawn. Betty had no prior knowledge of star maps or cosmology or anything to that nature, and then all of a sudden she's able to draw this star map that is years later verified to be spot on, star for star. She had to get the information somewhere, and I doubt it was from her subconscious.
Dr. Simon, however, concluded that all abduction memories were subconscious fabrications inspired by the contents of Betty's earlier dreams.
And of course, that's what you would expect from a hardened non-believer and skeptic. However,
nevertheless, he admitted that there were a number of inconsistencies between the two accounts and the dream narrative that he could not explain.
Yeah, like the fact that her husband experienced the exact same thing she did. That's really hard to do when she had the dream and not him.
The Hills is now considered a landmark case in ufology. It was not the first ever case of alleged alien abduction, but it achieved an unprecedented degree of media exposure.
Which, once again, at that time, given the scenario, that's the last thing that they wanted in their life was a bunch of media circus and the fame and celebrity that comes with being such, because remember, America wasn't the most liberal at that time, and they weren't the most accepted couple at that time.
The Hills was also the first publicized abduction case to involve a period of so-called missing time. Dr. Simon's pioneering work on the Hills taught ufologists that hypnotic regression, when used responsibly, could help to recover missing memories, diagnose cases of alien abduction, and mitigate patient trauma.
So this was the first case of alien abduction that had a lot of things that we would find continually over the years in the rest of the case files that we would study, especially in the next one, the other most well-known case file. If you guys have ever heard of the movie in the 90s, Fire in the Sky, this was based on a true story, the story of a man named Travis Walton.
Made famous by the Hollywood film Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton abduction story has become a hotbed of controversy. On November 5, 1975, Walton and 5 other loggers working in the Arizona wilderness piled into a truck for the drive home after a hard day's work.
So once again, our story starts with our heroes driving down the road.
Minutes later, the crew spotted a bright light coming from behind a hill. Filled with curiosity, they drove closer until they could see a large silvery disc hovering just above a clearing. While the others stayed in the truck, a fascinated Walton leapt out and ran toward the disc.
Once again, he gets up out of the vehicle and takes off towards the craft. And mind you, this happened right in front of all of his workmates who are still in the truck.
Ignoring the shouts from the rest of his crew to get away and come back. As Walton approached the disc, it suddenly began to make sounds like a loud turbine and wobble from side to side, scaring Walton, who then began to back away.
Now, see, here's where I'm torn, because I've always said if I ever encountered an alien craft, I'd be the first one to run up banging on the door. Hey, let me in, let's go. You guys are late. I've been waiting on you for a while, you know. And I do not say that jokingly. I really would do that. So I don't know if I would get scared and run off in this case or not. I'm going to be honest with you.
According to one of the men on Walton's crew, a beam of blue-green light shot out of the disc and struck Walton, sending him sprawling backwards. The terrified crew immediately put the truck into gear and hightailed it off the mountain and immediately called the police.
Some friends, huh? They watched their buddy get sucked up into a UFO and they just take off, right? But they did go to the police, and the police actually made them the main suspects for a while because the guy went missing for a number of days.
Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison answered their call and came to meet the men, saying later that all of the men were distraught and 2 were in tears. Although skeptical of the story, he said if they were acting, they were awfully good at it.
And you know when someone is displaying true emotion.
Within hours, a police search of the abduction site discovered nothing, and the next day an exhaustive search involving horses, helicopters, and jeeps still failed to discover anything. At this point, the police grew suspicious of the logging crew, believing the abduction story to be a cover for an accident or a murder.
Like I mentioned a moment ago, they became prime suspects in this missing persons case.
A polygraph test administered days later indicated that the men were not lying about their UFO sighting or that they had hurt Walton.
Now, here is where this case goes from weird to just downright strange.
Days later, a disoriented Walton called his brother-in-law, Grant Neff, from a public phone. Rushed to a hospital, Walton relayed a story of being examined by aliens similar to the popular grays described by other abductees.
And I just want to drive that point home one more time. All of the other abductees, or the majority of the abductee case files, all describe the exact same gray alien. So that's intriguing in and of itself because they all describe the exact same creature. If 10, 20, 30, 40, 100, 500 people told you they seen the exact same person, you would have to start believing these people when they started describing this person to a T, right? How is this any different?
And having an encounter with a strangely human-like male and female alien who would not answer his questions and at one point anesthetized him. A medical examination discovered a small puncture mark on his right arm consistent with a hypodermic injection, but it was nowhere near a vein. His urine also showed a lack of ketones, which, if Walton had indeed been without food as he insisted, and as his weight loss suggested, should have been present as his body began breaking down fats in order to survive.
So far, every bit of his story is checking out. Now, mind you, there's already been a missing persons case file. They already suspected his buddies of doing something. Now he's showed up out of the blue with this really wild story about being abducted by aliens that just happens to match the story that his buddies told the police to begin with. So all of this is well documented. This is one of the most well documented UFO abduction case files ever recorded.
To this day, Walton's story remains the stuff of controversy, with Walton failing a polygraph test on the TV game show called The Moment of Truth.
Which, let's be honest, I don't know how much I trust game shows.
Skeptics believe the entire story was made up for publicity, and also because Walton and his crew were severely behind in their logging contract. Walton's alleged abduction allowed them to secure an extension from the Arizona government. However, Walton's crew remained adamant for decades after the incident that the entire story was true.
I would also like to point out that Walton passed a large number of polygraph tests before the one on the TV show. So, again, I don't know how much weight I put into this TV show. And I did watch this the other day. I had somebody drop a link to me. I believe it was last night, as a matter of fact. Maybe it was this morning that I watched it. But yeah, I did watch that. So, again, I just don't know how much weight I put into these game shows. But just the same, this is one of the wildest and most well-known case files within ufology abduction.
Even the police who first responded to the original frantic telephone call for help remarked at how visibly shaken and distraught the men appeared to be that night.
And in many case files we went over in this show, you guys have heard how it's really affected the person's life involved, and this is no different. This affected Travis and his buddies' lives for decades, and never once did they change their story. With all the ridicule, everything they went through, never once did they turn around and say, oh, no, this was wrong, or I lied, or anything like that. If that many people were carrying a lie, it's hard for that many people to hold a lie for that long. I'm just saying, something would have come out by now, but that is my personal opinion. Remember, this is coming from the guy that come into abduction scenarios with the there's no way this could be going on mindset. Even I had the skeptical mindset as a paranormal researcher, as one should have in my opinion. But do you know whether or not you've been being abducted? Do you think maybe you have? Have you got lost time? Is there time you can't account for after seeing a weird object in the sky? Well, here are 7 signs that you may have been experiencing an alien abduction.
Number 7, lost time.
Which we've already heard in a couple of case files tonight.
A common occurrence linked with alien abductions is loss of time. Many abductees have reported missing hours or days during which they cannot recall their whereabouts. The abductee is usually returned to the same spot from where they were taken, waking up hours or sometimes days later and only realizing they have experienced missing time. Upon checking a timepiece, one alien abductee named Sylvia described one of the more startling incidents.
Have you had this experience? Have you suddenly realized that hours or even days have just disappeared and gone missing? If so, you may have had an abduction experience.
I've been invited to lunch by one of my closest friends who was in town on business, and remember being so excited to see her. After getting dressed, I made my way to the front door. It was noon and the restaurant was only 10 minutes away, so I was sure I would be on time for our 1 o'clock lunch date. I remember pulling my keys from my purse and reaching for the front door handle. The next thing I knew, I woke up on my bed, my keys still in my hand, and the time on my alarm clock was 3:20 p.m. I'd lost almost 3 hours.
I couldn't even imagine losing 3 hours like that, getting hit ready to put my key in the door, and then all of a sudden I wake up on my bed 3 hours later. That would be baffling to me.
Sylvia quickly went to her phone and checked the messages on her machine. My friend had called me twice, wondering where I was, as I'd obviously missed our lunch together. To this day, I still don't know what to tell her.
Yeah, sorry I missed our lunch date. I disappeared for a little while. I mean, how does that go over, right? So if you have lost or missing time, you may have been in an abduction scenario. What is the next sign? Also, go ahead and put a 1 in the chat room, either here on the DarkWolf's Den Show chat room or over on the rippinrabbithole.com chat room over there on YouTube. Either way, go ahead and put a 1 in the chat room if you've ever had a lost time scenario like that. I can't say that I have, as I know of.
Number 6, sleepwalking. Sleepwalking is a normal phenomenon, affecting millions of people. However, alien abductees who have no prior symptoms of sleepwalking suddenly experience this condition seemingly overnight.
And I can tell you that just suddenly gaining a sleepwalk habit overnight is not a normal thing.
Their family members often find them in various places around their home, where they guide them back to bed. A son of an alien abductee explained how his mother would walk out of her bedroom with a terrified look on her face. She would be rubbing her hands together as if she was freezing and trying to warm herself, although the temperature in the house was comfortable. I could hear her mumbling to herself and saying, "It's time to go, it's time to go."
So if you suddenly, out of the blue for no other known reason, gain the sleepwalking, you may have had an alien abduction. Go ahead and put a 1 in the chat room if you've had both an if you've had lost time as well as suddenly become a sleepwalker. Put a 2 if you've ever suddenly just become a sleepwalker, and how about a 3 if none of the above?
Number 5, unexplainable blood. Are you waking up from your sleep and finding blood stains in your bed?
I don't think that's a normal question. But truth be told, no, I've never woke up and had random blood stains in my bed, and I don't think this is talking about the naturally caused occurrences that may happen to the human body. I think this means for reasons unknown.
If you regularly wake up to find small drops of blood on your pillow or on your bed sheets, this may be a sign of having been abducted. Of course, a common explanation of this is nosebleeds.
Which, fair enough, always go for the most logical explanation.
However, alleged abductee Sylvia Weinroth recalled, after undergoing light hypnosis, multiple abductions by short grey creatures in the summer of 1999.
And once again, here we have our buddies the Greys.
Finding unexplainable blood was her first indication. She states, "Each night I go to sleep, I completely covered myself with the bedding. However, I started to wake up in the morning and I was lying on top of my sheets and blanket. Several times I looked down and saw little red spots near my feet. As I looked closer, I discovered it was blood. I looked all over my legs but couldn't find any wounds or cuts. Then I inspected my entire body for the origin of the blood, but found nothing that could explain it."
That would be kind of trippy if you had blood on your blanket or pillow and had no explanation, no wounds, no reason it should be there whatsoever. Like it just literally seeped through the skin.
She started suffering from dizzy spells and visited her doctor, who found a possible explanation. She said, "After almost fainting from dizziness, my son took me to the doctor. They ran tests and discovered that I was suffering from exsanguination. Exsanguination is a severe loss of blood."
Maybe she was sweating out blood, but I highly doubt that. So, has anybody had any issues like that before? Go ahead, put a 1 in the chat room if you've experienced all 3 of these. 2 in the chat room if you've not really experienced any of these at all.
Number 4, medical dreams. Usually, the purpose for which aliens abduct humans is to examine their bodies, even though many abductees forget about their abductions.
And one might ask, if they're so advanced, why would they be interested in studying us and examining our bodies? Well, we're quite advanced and we're pretty interested in studying all the animals and creatures around us, right? How's it any different? If they're that much more advanced than us, then we would be no much, probably more than an ape, really. And we study apes all the time, so it isn't out of the realm to think that an alien species could be nothing more than, I don't know, curious?
Memories persist in the subconscious mind. Abductees will often have recurring dreams where the individual is undergoing medical treatment or procedures. These dreams are often always confusing and terrifying, with the subjects being poked, prodded, sliced, and injected with needles.
Once again, we dissect and test and do all kind of different things to creatures that we consider, quote, lower than us intelligently, end quote, all the time. So, again, I don't see much difference here yeah, they traveled all the way across the universe just to do tests, or wherever you may believe they are from. I know that's still a hotly debated topic even in ufology, but you think they come here just to do tests and study humans? Well, yeah, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, but let's get back to the list real quick.
Dreamers are usually frozen with fear during these tortured dreams, with their bodies paralyzed in shock. Sylvia recalls many of these medical dreams, stating, "The most unsettling dream, or nightmare I should say, was one in which I was looking up into darkness. There was no light anywhere around me, but I could hear movement and whispers. A second later, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. I wanted to reach out for my belly, but I was unable to move."
And this right here is classic in the abduction case files. This is found pretty much consistently across all of the case files, where they're paralyzed, there's some kind of medical procedure going on, they're going specifically into the belly and around the lower areas of the body. I'm going to leave it at that, but the reproductive areas, we'll go there. And they seem to be interested in that for whatever reason. And again, we can theorize here in a little while.
Then I woke up from the dream, sitting up in bed with my hands over my stomach, crying. The pain in my belly was so overwhelming that I vomited several times over the next hour or so.
So either she had an extremely vivid dream that the body picked up as being a real encounter, even if it was a dream, or there was a real encounter and she had a physical reaction afterwards. One of the two.
I had no idea what was wrong, but I was certain something had been done to me. However, she recalls some dreams having a positive outcome.
What you are about to hear next, I've only heard in about 5 or 6 case files, but this isn't a lone case file that you're about to hear this. Well, you'll see.
In another nightmare, I was again in complete darkness and felt long needles inserted into my eyes.
That just sends chills down my spine. I could not even imagine that. However,
the next morning, I reached for my glasses on the nightstand and found that my vision was much less blurry. And while I didn't have a perfect sight, I was able to go through my day without the need of my glasses. They, up there, fixed my vision.
Again, there are about 5 or 6 case files that I found that I know of personally that have this exact same thing, where they all of a sudden fixed their vision or fixed some kind of medical ailment that was before unknown to them, or even if it was known to them, it was something that wasn't necessarily, they could be fixed, if you will, by modern science, like degenerative eye disease, for instance. If your eyes start failing with this, then there's nothing science or medical science can do. It's just going to fail. Possible LASIK surgery, I don't know how that works, but the aliens were given LASIK surgery apparently before LASIK surgery was a thing. Once again, this is not a lone case file that we find this in. I found it across a couple different case files.
Number 3, bright lights. While under hypnosis, alien abductees have reacted in severe panic after recalling bright lights beaming down on them or through their homes before being taken. These occurrences have been documented in regression therapy as precursor to their abductions.
Which, in this wolf's opinion, is clearly a technology that we just do not understand yet.
Sylvia is no stranger to bright lights, stating, under hypnosis, I recalled that I would be elevated from my bed and almost blinded by a bright white light. I would only see it for a second before I lost consciousness and awoke again on the cold metal bed.
Again, this is a constant across all abduction case files, is this cold metal bed that they lay them on.
Once I remember the light, I was forced to remain at home when it was dark outside. Headlights, streetlights, and anything bright would send a shiver down my spine, and I would freeze in terror. It's hard to explain, but I was filled with a strong sense of dread that something bad was going to happen to me. It's been years since I left the house after dark.
And once again, I just have to reiterate and drive home this point. Is something real going on when it truly affects the person's life way down the road. When it's so life-changing that it changes how you react to the world in your everyday waking life, like not going outside at night because of a bright light and it's setting you off because it reminds you, at least subconsciously if nothing else, of these memories of the alien abduction and laying on the table under these bright lights. Of course, the bright light in one's eye would trigger that same scared emotion, because we know those are the stronger emotions for whatever reason. So, yeah, that would definitely be a trigger. And once again, when you see these things that affect these people throughout the rest of their life, you have to really know that they experienced something. Maybe not something that makes sense to you, but definitely something. What is next up on our list? By the way, I'd like to know, have you guys following along here been checking stuff off? Has anybody checked off everything on the list yet? I would really love to know. Go ahead, put a 1 in the chat room if you've checked off everything so far on this list in order, as well as having a UFO encounter. I would love to know.
Implants. Usually alien abductees have little proof or evidence they've been abducted except for their hypnotherapy sessions and memories. However, alien implants are all too real.
And in the second half, you guys are going to get kind of a bonus episode, as we're going to focus in on the hard evidence that exists for these abduction cases, which is, of course, as we're hearing right now, the implant phenomenon. So make sure you guys stick around for that. We're not going to go to break just yet. We're going to finish this list. I know we're running way over time right now. Forgive me, guys, at the station. I do apologize. Give me just a couple more minutes and we'll go to break.
In alien abductions and showcase some truly terrifying evidence of aliens. Recently deceased Dr. Roger Lear was an American pediatric surgeon and ufologist. He had removed about a dozen implants from people's bodies and claimed they were devices that emit radio signals.
And once again, remember Dr. Roger Lear. We will be hearing from him in the second half of the show.
These bizarre metallic implants are likely tracking devices and are often inside people who have been abducted multiple times. Lear alleged that the implants had moved by themselves during surgery, as if to avoid removal. Lear said that laboratory testing of the implants implied that they were of extraterrestrial origin. Most people who have implants usually don't know they have them. Symptoms of these implants include an abnormal scar or mark on the body that can't be explained, long periods of lost time, flashbacks and/or dreams of being on a surgical table surrounded by lights and beings, hard pieces of metallic or plastic-like substances under the skin that shouldn't be there, uncontrollable actions, painful nasal cavities as if something hard is up there, headaches due to a brain implant, nosebleeds. Alien implants are slowly becoming more prevalent in the scientific community as real proof of alien encounters through abductions.
I'm probably going to repeat this in the second half, but definitely do not let any skeptic tell you there's no solid evidence for alien abduction cases. There is a lot of it. It is whether or not they're willing to acknowledge or accept the evidence that makes the difference.
There have been thousands of abduction cases that show little evidence except for the physical evidence.
And that's what skeptics scream all the time, right? That's just anecdotal, it's just people's stories, there's no evidence. Show me physical evidence. Well, there actually is physical evidence. There's a lot of it. Once again, we're going to hear from Dr. Roger Lear in the second half, and primarily just Dr. Roger Lear, the expert on this. We're going to find out all about the alien implant issue. But last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, number 1 on our list.
Number 1, scars. Lastly, mysterious and unexplainable scars can sometimes be found on alien abductees. Body scars often range from bruises, laser cuts, scoops or burns, and can be found usually on the waist, ankles or back of the person. Some of these unusual marks don't look like your typical scars. They can appear in very intricate, geometric and detailed shapes. These strange markings can come out of the blue in a very short span of time, with the abductee not having sustained any injury to receive it.
So what do you guys think? Did anybody match every one on the list? Have you got missing time? Have you got scars that have showed up out of nowhere? Have you suddenly gained a bout of sleepwalking? Do bright lights mess with you? Have these things been something that you guys have dealt with? I would really honestly love to know if there's anybody in either chat room who has experienced all of this, because that is just absolutely amazing to me. But ladies and gentlemen, we've got to go ahead and take a network break right here. We've crossed over the top of the hour, and we're going to get in trouble if we don't. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a network break right here, and we'll be back for the second half of the Darkwolf's Den Show, where we're going to look at this hard evidence and these implants and the expert of the removal of the implants, Dr. Roger Lear, right after these messages. Ladies and gentlemen, don't you touch that dial.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Sex in the city? Nope. Interview with a vampire? Nope. If you build it, they will come? Febreze? 2 E's in the middle? Wrong again. Depends. Nope. Welcome to the Twilight Zone, my friends. A phenomenon known as the Mandela effect. You may have heard of it. You may want to not neglect. Unbecoming, awake, and spiritually inclined. So sit back, relax, while I blow your mind. Take the thumb off the cell, stop following the sheep. Down the rabbit hole we go. Are you ready for that leap? The Zapruder film, #JFK. I looked at the footage and I said, what the hey? How come there are 6 people in that dang car? Stretch limo, for me, this was all too bizarre. A glass behind the driver, no way, Jose. I remember before the car, my mind was in total disarray. Trying to make sense of what I was seeing, what I was witnessing. Didn't connect with my inner being. A second woman in the car for me was only the first lady. Do you smell what the rock is cooking? All this seemed kinda shady. Berenstein Bears. Nope. Shazam? Sinbad? Not in this reality. Good lord. An awakening. Was it all a revelation? The naysayers and skeptics call it confabulation. They say we misremembered and call it bad. Crazy. Did you smoke a doob? Maybe that's why it's a little bit hazy. Unless you experience it, you'll never know. But enough of that. On with this Mandela effect flow. Mandela effect in the house. What in the world happened to Ed McMahon? In this reality, Publishers Clearinghouse was not a fan. Never the spokesperson, but we remember it clear as day. McMahon holding that check while the winner yelled out, yay! American Family Publishers, never heard of them until now. This Mandela effect has me raising the people's eyebrow. So many theories on what it could be. Have you ever heard of CERN and the LHC? Luke, I am your father. Nope. Sally Fields? Nope, wrong again. That stands for the Large Hadron Collider. I thought I would mention. You know, the machine that opens up portals into different dimensions? You're probably thinking that this is all science fiction, but you gotta think outside the box and have no restrictions. Alternate realities and parallel dimensions. Okay, I get some of your apprehensions. Could this all be a spiritual evolution? Cause the human race has grown tired of this toxic pollution. Mandela effect in the house. No, you're not going crazy. Some people, they just don't understand. That's just the way it is. You know? Stay strong, my friends. That's just the way it is. Dolly has no braces? Are you serious? Good lord. Joel Osteen. Oh wait, Joel Osteen. So what the heck happened to the owl? Oh my gosh. Oh, this is definitely the Twilight Zone. Anyhow.
Ladies and gentlemen, we seem to be experiencing a bit of an issue. Bear with us.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Darkwolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and it is November 12th, 2020. And welcome back to the second half of the Darkwolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just tuning in tonight, we spent the entire first hour going over abduction cases and all the similarities they show up, and there's many, many similarities that show up amongst all these case files and abduction files, of course. But the main thing, the main evidence is the hard evidence, right? Anybody can tell a story. Anybody can say, I was abducted and this happened and that happened, but you can't always produce hard evidence. However, there have been, in the last, 15 or 20 years easily, this evidence that has suddenly started showing up from these alien abductee people, and that is these implants, these alien implants. When an abductee comes back, some of them have these little implants inside them. And for whatever reason, and a lot of people are wondering, well, why would they do that? Well, don't we tag cattle? Don't we tag animals around our own world all the time? Is it really odd to think if there's a species that is more advanced than us and they're studying us, that they're not going to tag us in some way? I mean, it makes sense to me anyway. Especially considering we found that these go down family genetic lines for whatever reason. It's like they're interested in certain bloodlines and not other bloodlines for some reason. Some reason that is yet to be determined. It's unknown if there's an RH factor connection. There's a lot of speculation in ufology, but nothing 100% guaranteed. But once again, there's the hard evidence of the alien implants in these abduction cases. And no one knows this better than the expert in removing alien implants, who's no longer with us anymore, but we do get to hear his expertise still. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Roger Lear. Our patient in the case file, in which we're about to hear, is a 47-year-old gentleman who has a previous history of alien abductions.
The area of concern here is the second toe of the left foot. We had x-rays taken, and they showed a metallic foreign body measuring about 4 millimeters in length and about the thickness of a pencil lead. And as you know, in the other cases, we've seen about the same thing. So we have a number of these, at least 8 or 9, which all look the same and have the same essential qualities.
And once again, when you have the same things over and over in a case file, you have to stand up and take notice.
If you've been following my research as it's been going, if you go way, way back to the first and second cases, and we had laboratory data coming from Los Alamos National Laboratories and from New Mexico Tech. If you remember, they didn't know what these samples were. This was a blind study, and they came back with a conclusion that these are a meteorite-like samples. And as you know, people don't step on meteorites or whack them with their hand, otherwise they'd have a very big hole.
So even though it is slim, there is the possibility of somebody stepping on a meteorite. Fair enough. However, the likelihood of that being every single implant that is removed is highly unlikely, and I can assure you that is not every implant that is removed. That is just the blind study conclusion of what they could come up with that closest matched the material that they were sent.
Once the x-rays are taken, then we know that there's an object there. We use a CAT scan, and the CAT scan will give us the approximation of where the object lies, and we're able to then do the surgery more specifically. I told you it was about 3 to 5 millimeters. It's radio dense. That means that it appears in an x-ray about the thickness of a pencil lead, second toe again.
And across implant case files, that is about the right thickness, roughly the thickness of a pencil lead.
Estimated date of insertion was February the 28th of 2008. And how do we know that? Well, the individual remembers waking up in the morning and he saw a couple of drops of blood on the bed sheets, and he looked down at the toe, and there was a couple of small puncture wounds which healed within a very short time.
And once again, you remember in the first half, we spoke about the sudden blood drops that would appear on the bed. Here it is yet again in an implant case.
As with the other cases, again, there was no scar and no portal of entry available.
And like he mentioned with the other cases and case files surrounding this, there's no obvious point of entry. Like if you got a rock in your foot, you'd see where it pushed into the skin, right? If a needle pushed in your skin, you'd see where it pushed in. But a piece of pencil lead or something the size of a piece of pencil lead, leaving no entry point whatsoever, 3 small puncture wounds, and a little blood in the bed where you shouldn't be stepping on pencil lead or meteorites or anything else, in bed. Still, it's interesting that it's in all of these case files.
Also, if you recall, before we take anything out, we like to find out as much information as possible as to what's going on. And as we're able to do that and get better and better equipment, we're able to get much more knowledge.
And of course, the more knowledge that we can gain on this subject, the better off we definitely are.
And as you recall, one of the cases we did was emanating a radio frequency.
So one of the implants, and again, I've heard this across multiple case files, but one of the implants was emanating a radio frequency, but not any radio frequency.
Which was verified by a friend of mine in Las Vegas, let's put it that way, who sent me a classified FCC sheet.
So the frequency was a well-known FCC frequency, but here's why.
And we found out that that frequency was broadcasting on a deep space radio frequency. Now, if that don't knock your socks off, I don't know what does.
It definitely sent my socks flying across the room, I tell you that. This implant, this weird piece of metal or meteorite, according to the experts, but this weird piece of metal is giving off this radio signal that happens to be a deep space radio signal, and that's just a little more than coincidence now.
We have emissions coming from this last case too. We use a Gauss meter to detect the electromagnetic activity, and we found that we had a magnetic field of greater than 10 milligauss. Ionizing radiation, we were only able to detect the normal background radiation using a Geiger counter.
So no radiation, but an increased magnetic field for sure.
And the radio emissions, again, we're at 14.749650 megahertz. I don't know yet. I haven't had enough time to find out exactly where on the band or where that is going, but we're finding out. We had emissions of RF and ELF and the microwave bands.
And of course, ELF and microwave are not exactly the safest for humans.
Now, the specimen appeared, when you looked at it as on an X-ray, as a solid unit. But yet when we went to remove it, it came out in multiple fragments. It was quite brittle in nature, and it sort of came apart.
Which doesn't happen all the time, but has happened in a number of the implant removals.
And the fragments, as in the other cases, were surrounded by this very strange type of biological coating, which we've been finding with some of the other objects.
And this is one of the strangest parts of the entire implant phenomenon. You see, if you get a foreign body in your object, your body will reject it. Your immune system will go nuts. It will build a calcium layer around it. It will do its best to reject it or keep the body from being affected by it. I know this because I had a foreign object embedded in the middle ball of my left foot. I don't know what it was, because the only answer that I got when they sent it to lab was that when they cracked it open, the moment oxygen hit it, it turned instantly to dust. So to this day, I have never found out what was in the middle ball of my left foot. But there's these implants that have this coating on them, and it's a very special coating. I've found across all these case files that this has showed up in, that this coating is probably meant, most likely from what we can tell, to keep it from being rejected by the body. It's almost like a biological stem cell-like coating that will allow the body to accept it and not even realize that it's there, or cause a immune system response against whatever object or implant has been embedded. This is definitely technology that is just a little bit beyond our current modern accepted scientific technologies. Not to say that we couldn't do it, but in the date and time that this was being done, I don't believe we had the technology publicly available, and I dare say we barely do now. But all of these samples in these people, they usually don't even know they have them unless they have some kind of signal like the blood on the bed, or they feel it in their body, something like that. But it's never rejected by the body. It's never swollen up. It's never got any kind of immuno response whatsoever to these implants, because of this layer of biological material that is surrounding it for some reason. So I don't think meteorites come with this biological material. I'm pretty sure the rocks that we step on randomly also don't have it.
The fragments were all placed on a surgical drape, which you will see, and I had to very carefully pick these fragments up and put them in the specimen container, which contains the patient's own blood serum.
Which keeps the implant from freaking out, and hopefully will trick it into thinking that it's still in the body for some reason. But what do you guys think? We've heard a lot tonight. We have heard about abductions. We've heard about the implants. We've heard about missing time. We've heard about a whole lot of case files tonight, guys, including hard evidence. It's not all the time that a paranormal topic comes along with hard, undeniable, unquestionable, anomalous evidence. And in the abduction cases, not only do we have descriptions that match each other across time and across continents and everything else, but we have hard physical evidence, and that's something that is hard to deny, even with the most hardened of common sense skeptics. But what do you guys think? Do you think that it could be real? Do you think people are being abducted and tested on and used perhaps for reproduction uses or whatever the case may be? Or do you think it's perhaps just me abducting your imagination? In the end, ladies and gentlemen, you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right. That's it for this episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show for Thursday, November 12th, 2020. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you hanging out with us, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of Abduction and Implants. And if you did, make sure to go ahead and give us a thumbs up down there and hit that like button and share and all the fun things that YouTube begs you to do. Ladies and gentlemen, the den may be closing, and the weekend is now officially kicked off. But don't you worry, the weekend fun has only just begun. If you guys enjoyed this show, definitely make sure you come back Friday through Sunday for our buddy, the other animal of radio over there, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit. That's right. He's got his AJ's Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show coming up this Friday through Sunday. On Friday night, I happen to know that he is going to be talking about Lotto Powerballs, right? Have you ever won the Lotto Powerball? More importantly, what's happened to those that have? Is it as glamorous as it's all cracked up to be? That's right, that's tomorrow night. Then on Saturday, make sure you find your way back into the rabbit hole where AJ is going to discuss sociopaths versus psychopaths. What's the difference? I've been asked this a lot lately. I'm really glad he's covering this. Do you know the difference? Can you spot a sociopath and a psychopath? And more importantly, what does it mean to you? And ladies and gentlemen, Sunday, reverse psychology is his topic. Have you mastered the art of reverse psychology? And more importantly, how is it being used against us as a population? So make sure you tune in Sunday night for AJ the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show as he rounds out the weekend, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the end of the weekend here at Rippin' Common Sense Radio. Don't worry though, we will be back next Wednesday to kick it off once again with a brand new episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show. That's it for us here in the den tonight, guys. I'm going to go over to my favorite hangout. I'm going to dig down into the rabbit hole over at the rippinrabbithole.com. That is RIPPONRABBITHOLE.com. That's right, over there you're going to find the 24/7 Backstage Lounge. That's right, my favorite hangout. Click on the 24/7 Backstage Lounge, scroll about halfway down that page. You're going to select the VIP entrance, select your camera, select your microphone. You can turn that off the moment you get in there and come hang out with us. Also, guys, don't forget, kick off next week once again with Never Nothing November. I want to hear what you are thankful for. Before next Wednesday, I need you to go to the rippinrabbithole.com, RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. You guys hear that? At the bottom of every single page over there is a great big red button that says record. Select that, give us your name and what you're thankful for, and we'll put it on the air as part of our special Never Nothing November segment. That will be next week, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and on behalf of Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, Walt House, and everyone at Rippin' Common Sense Radio, we thank you for being here, and remember always, stay awake, but dare to dream. Good night, everybody. Ow! Yeah! That's right.
I'm lost and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever Oh, what a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner. Is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner. Is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonder